Welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast with Stuart Fensterheim, LCSW, your source for the latest tips and practical down-to-earth advice on creating emotionally connected, thriving relationships. Now, here's Stuart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. Today is May 28th, and I am in La Jolla, California, here for a therapist conference. And basically, through my contact with some of the other therapists going to the conference, we have sort of like a Facebook group. And in the group, we've been talking a lot about our practices and how to really send our message out to everyone, who we are as therapists and as people, and really trying to really perfect letting all of you and my readers and listeners know a lot about who I am and who the other therapists are. In my interactions on the Facebook page, I've met somebody who is pretty special. Cammie is a therapist out of Sacramento. And what's pretty cool about Cammie is that I learned through my interactions with her that her specialty is first responders. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about the last week or so is the Yarnell fire and how many people lost their lives and some of the reports that have been coming out. But more importantly, being that I am a couples counselor, really how those families really struggle with both just dealing with the loss as well as one of the things that I know is, for instance, my daughter is dating someone that's considering being a police officer or a criminologist. And we were talking the other day about that, and I was pleased to hear that the kind of law he wanted to do did not involve being a police officer. And one of the things about that is I don't think she could deal with his leaving for the day and not knowing if he's going to return. And that struggle is something these families deal with every day of their relationship and their life together. And Cammie, that is her specialty. What she does is basically works with these families and helps them try to stay close and connected in spite of some of the dangers. And the other thing about her is I want to just make sure that I tell everyone about you in terms of she's a mother, she's married, and I think a mother of 2 children, right, Cammie?
Correct.
Okay, 2 children. And she's also an adjunct professor at a college. So I'm really, really thrilled, Cammie, that you've agreed to come on and talk with my listeners about this very important subject. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what got you interested in doing this kind of specialization, and do you have a history with that? Just tell them a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here, to be able to speak with your listeners on such a poignant anniversary. It is one of the largest losses of firefighter lives in history. In recent history. So a little bit about my background. I am, my name is Plotner Storck. I'm a licensed psychotherapist out of Sacramento, California. And this is definitely a little near and dear to my heart. My husband is a firefighter for the city of Sacramento. He has been working there for over 15 years now. So I definitely understand the struggles that fire families go through. In my prior history, prior to being a therapist, I actually worked as a probation officer for Sacramento County. So I also understand the police side of things also, and the criminal justice piece that comes into play. But really being near and dear to my heart is really the struggles that couples go through and individuals go through because of the stress that gets brought home due to the nature of the job. You brought up a really good example of your daughter not knowing if her spouse would then be coming home for that day. And those are things that we go through every shift that comes up, is wondering what's going to happen. Are they going to be safe? And then the sad thing is even if it's not your spouse, they're still your family, because it's a very close-knit community when you work for a department, whether it's police or fire or any type of public safety. It's very close-knit.
So let me ask you a question, because you brought up an interesting thing about your experience, that you've worked with probation as well as with the fire department. And I guess one of the questions that I always wonder about is those 2 first responders, police going into, and I know domestic violence, for example, is the one call that most police officers
Correct.
Don't want to do. And then you have the firemen with the fires, and here in Arizona you have the wildfires. Is there a difference between the struggles that those families have, the legal side with the police and the fire?
Well, I think there's definitely, the police come in and they're the ones dealing with the criminal aspect of things. So they're, at times that they're showing up first, and then you have the firemen who come in after, because the majority of firemen nowadays are also paramedics. So they're coming in and they're cleaning up the scene, so to speak. They might be with the patients. For example, a domestic violence case, they may be riding to the hospital with that particular victim. So the types of traumas, the secondary traumas that our first responders see can be very similar, because they're both responding to similar scenes. But the type of struggles, for example, in our Sacramento City Fire Department, they work 48-hour shifts. So my spouse is gone for a minimum of 2 days at a time. I know with the wildland fires and CDF, we have the Department of Forestry in California, so we call it CDF, which is similar to the Arizona, hot shots, things like that. They can be gone for weeks at a time. So that's very similar to the stress of a military wife, where your spouse can be gone on shift for 30 days. And you may not have cell phone contact, you may not have email contact, so you don't always know if your spouse is safe. And then what are they going to come home with? What did they see during that 48-hour shift or that 30-day shift? It's always, they deal with similar struggles from that perspective.
And from that perspective also, what I'm thinking is, I'm just imagining if I'm gone for a week or even a couple of days and I come home, and let's say my child had gotten hurt, to walk in the door to see an injured child, and then to have to hear about it, the whole story, fresh, brand new from my partner, if that relationship isn't real secure, and let's say I have some trust issues with my partner, and not so much in terms of like fidelity, but trust in terms of, can I trust her word? That must bring up a whole slew of issues.
Well, I think it brings up a slew of issues from both sides of the relationship, because speaking as a firewife myself, I could tell you when anything is going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong when my husband's on shift. So
just happens to work that way.
We just had an incident in our household where my youngest, who's 2.5 years old, she fell at a plate structure and broke her leg. Sure enough, my husband was on shift, and so not only do I have to call and explain to him that his daughter is hurt, but now I have to hope that, as weird as it is, that she actually really is hurt, because I'm calling him away from his shift to come home to the hospital. And then, sure enough, her leg was broken. So he is a first responder to fix somebody else, but now he can't fix his own child. So
and not being there for his child.
There's the kind of the conundrum that comes into it. But as the spouse, there tends to be also some frustration, which is, I'm single parenting for a portion of my month. And, I'm very fortunate in what I do for a living, being a therapist. I'm able to set my own schedule. And, I love what I do. I love when I come into work. It feels like a break sometimes from the kiddos. But other spouses work 40-hour plus weeks, and then they're still the only spouse that's on while their spouse as a first responder is on shift.
Right. So basically you work in 2 or 3 jobs, because you're working the job as a mom, you're working as a job at whatever position you have.
Correct.
And then the job as a wife, that's sort of an interesting kind of dilemma.
Right.
And then if he walks into that scene with take your situation, your 2.5-year-old child, one of the elements that I think absolutely has to be in place there is his being able to say to himself, I know she did the best job possible and was alert, watching my child.
Right.
So that this injury could not be avoided. If there's any doubts in that, that rift between you and that person, the couple, how do you deal with that loss of not being present so that it doesn't create?
I think, my opinion of really working as a couple in the public safety field is you really have to never stop dating your spouse. And I say that, and it sounds very simplistic, but the reality is when you're dating your spouse, you still liked them and respected them. Right. So if we're still dating our spouse, we feel like they're on our side. We still like them. We still enjoy our company with them. We still respect them. And that really goes with respecting each other as parents and knowing that when one person is gone, that the other person truly is doing the best that they can, and not being bitter as the spouse that might be home while the other one is gone, is to say, I understand that they're gone because this is their job, that they're not gone because they just want to leave me with everything to deal with. And that's really the kind of the struggle that comes between the two spouses. spouses a lot of times is that you're gone so much, so now I'm single parenting, so don't question my decisions because you're not here to help me with them anyways. That tends to be a typical argument I see in the room with my couples, and really getting back to that place of understanding of we're both doing the best that we can, and we're really on each other's side. We're a team in this process, and that really helps solidify couples again.
But not a normal team, because a normal team, you're both there. You're both present. You're able to interact and talk about those issues. Because the other thing that I sometimes see in not necessarily first responders, but in a lot of the couples that I see is when someone is working nights, it could be at a factory, it could be no matter what. In the middle of all of this, and I'm thinking firemen especially, although they tend to be at the firehouse, I think. I mean, I don't have a great understanding of that. But in the middle of this tension between the two of you, where both of you care about each other, both of you want to work this out, all of a sudden you get called, and no matter what's going on between the two of you, you have to leave.
Correct.
And that abandonment feeling that must be for both people, not only the partner that's staying home, and we don't want to say that's the wife because there are a lot of female firefighters.
Correct.
But if you're in the middle of wanting, your heart is aching because you feel that disconnect, and yet you don't have a choice but to leave. That must be awful.
Well, I think that if you make every moment count, which I know is a really big deal for first responder families, when you really cherish your time together, you make sure that you're finding gratitude in the small things, because you never know when that's going to change, whether it is just a call away, it's an additional shift, or, you had Thanksgiving planned and your spouse gets mandatoried for another shift, whatever it is, to know that we're cherishing the time that we have together, because you never know when that time may alter. I'll share a little bit of a story about that. About 5 years ago, I got the phone call that no fire wife wants. My husband was blown up in a house explosion. There was a gas leak. Him and 3 other firefighters were burned, and that was a phone call that I never anticipated getting. And this was prior to us having children, which was definitely made it a little bit easier because I didn't have to explain it to them. But the phone call was something I never, as a fire wife, you ever want to hear. But what it did, though, is it reminded us that you never know when something's going to change. And I blissfully, at this point, we have been together 10 plus years. I blissfully at this point said, well, you just go to work and I don't want to always think about what goes on there. And then it was reality. Reality hit that this may be, the shift that he doesn't come home from. And we've lost some deputies in our area in California this year that are just heartbreaking. They're close friends of ours. And you never know. So it's really that place of, when it comes back around to couples therapy, of saying, hey, something's off. We need to check back in with each other. We need to learn how to communicate a little bit better. We need to learn how to have our intimate connection again, and really work together as a team in whatever moment, because my family doesn't always celebrate Christmas on Christmas. Sometimes it's 2 days later. Right. And so
you can't.
You can't. And so you really just learn to kind of overcome and adapt that way. And some of that is regular couples, I'll say also, but in the public safety field, you really learn, how do I cherish every moment, because I don't know what the next moment will bring me.
And the other piece of this, I think, as I think about what you just said, is how do I, as a parent, when my spouse is not there, let's not make it so big as Christmas, because that's pretty huge, but to the school play that my child just spent the last 4 months doing and is so excited that dad or mom is going to be there for that. Mm-hmm. How do I look my child in the face as the parent that stays home and say, dad or mom's not going to be there, and see the tears and the anguish, and not get angry or wish that my spouse worked somewhere else, did something else, but they love doing this. This is their calling. And how do I, within myself, say, I haven't just brought my child into this horrible situation?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head on one key point, which is that you explain to the child from the beginning. My girls are 2.5 and 4, and they know that what daddy does. They know daddy helps people. But the biggest thing is my spouse loves his job. That's one stress that my family doesn't have. I love what I do, and he loves what he does. So we don't have that stress where somebody comes home grumpy every day because they've been at a desk for 8 hours and they hate their boss. Right. He loves what he does. So that kind of helps smooth it over. But I think you have to start talking to kids from a really young age, and they learn kind of a little bit of the pattern that daddy's gone or mommy's gone, and that they'll be back, that they do love you, that they miss you. With the onset of all of the lovely technology we have nowadays, we FaceTime a lot. Right. We FaceTime daddy at the firehouse. And, so we make sure that they feel like they are connected and that they are welcome to go see daddy at the firehouse. I mean, we go by there, probably a couple times a month. We'll try and go by on shift so that then becomes daddy's second home. Oh, this is daddy's bed that he sleeps in tonight. We're going to go home and sleep in our bed tonight. And knowing that they're helping somebody. And we explain that with our police and CHP friends. We explain that with, the firefighter friends that we have. Really that they're out to help somebody, that somebody has to be there when you get a big boo-boo and you need help. So, depending on the age of the child, you kind of
and
explain
being excited that dad
mm-hmm.
is the one that helps people.
Right.
I mean, your kids are fortunate because they could really, in a lot of ways, say, my mom and dad
right.
have the calling to help others feel better, be happier, be safer. I mean, I have older children, I have teenagers, and it's not that common, I think, for you to feel like, oh, my kids really are excited about what I do, but you have a special thing there. The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking, and getting back to, our focus being on the couples and the relationship, is one of the things that I experienced in my life, being that I've had more than one relationship, is that what I really value about my marriage now compared to some other relationships I've had is that I really appreciate the small things that we mm-hmm. both do.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I'm hearing as sort of part of what comes from the first responder issues is really appreciating the small moments.
Absolutely.
And acknowledging for each other the small moments. So when you're there together on a weekend, to be able to look at each other in the eyes and say, I love you, and I am so thrilled that we're together, and not really focusing on the fact that there may be another weekend that you're not, mm-hmm. but focusing on the here and now and the positives, the growth, the joy of just being together.
Absolutely.
And being able to say, we're in this together.
Absolutely.
That's special.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of what I'm hearing from you.
That's very true. I always say that my kind of defining moment and happy place is my husband and I and the kids being able to go to Costco on a Wednesday morning. It sounds like the most mundane task,
a date night.
But it is. I mean, it's kind of funny. But the reason why is because I'm blessed that he's home. I'm love that we have this amazing schedule that we're able to be at Costco without the crowds on a Saturday. It's really just doing and spending time together and really finding ways to connect within your relationship. And it's like you said, it's really about that teamwork place of that we are on each other's team. It's not always easy, but we are on each other's team.
I think the next piece that I'd like to talk about is about your work with these families. And you've talked a lot about how to make every moment count and all of that. But sometimes, the horrible situations that you hear from the police, and I know from the first responders, especially with some of the interviews that happened right after the fire about sort of just being a fireman, mm-hmm. is really walking into these situations, especially like walking in and seeing a child injured, horribly injured, maybe scarred for life. And that stays with the first responders a lot of the time. And I think it's unavoidable that they then bring that home. And I think we hear more about the police not talking all the time about what they witness and what they see and keeping that in and all the impacts that has. Mm-hmm. Is a fireman have is that experience of really not talking about the things that they need to be talking about with their spouse especially, that one support for them? Does that happen, and how do you confront that, or how do you deal with that?
I think that is across the board, all first responders. They really have a hard time because they can easily open up to their family, and I say their work family, because you know that the person that just saw the same thing next to you understands. And sometimes trying to explain that to a partner or a spouse is really challenging because you can't get the depth of what occurred necessarily in that conversation, but having a safe place to do that. So either with your spouse or, with a therapist, there's various different ways to kind of relieve some of that PTSD, some of that post-traumatic stress from seeing things over and over and over again. And also, in the instance that we were discussing with the, Yarnell fire in particular, you not only have the loss of the lives, physical loss of lives, but you have the loss and those relationships for those coworkers that were there. And not only then the coworkers, then you go out one more ring, which is the spouses that were friends with those spouses. And now how do we have those relationships? How do I have a conversation with you knowing that your spouse isn't coming home tomorrow? It really makes that challenge for what is okay to talk about and what is not okay to talk about. And it's really department by department, the culture that's been established, which is kind of one of my missions in life, is to change the culture within the department so that they are able to talk about instances more than just having a debriefing that occurs after a major incident. There are supports and things that are offered, employee assistance programs, they'll do resources for therapy, but that is kind of short-lived sometimes. And so you have to ask, lean into your spouse and say, I'm having a hard time. And if you don't know how to talk about it, that's where somebody like you or myself comes in, is to help you have that conversation, because the spouse that wasn't there to experience the event sometimes doesn't understand why you're coming home and why you're grumpy. Why are you waking up having nightmares in the middle of the night? Why are you avoiding certain situations? I know my spouse would be none too thrilled for me sharing this, but after the house,
we won't tell him.
Hopefully he's not listening. After the house explosion, because it was a gas explosion that happened, and it was a noise that occurred right before. He said it kind of sounded like a barbecue lighting. It was kind of whoosh. And so I'll never forget, it was like probably 2 or 3 days later, he was in the shower door just popped closed, and he jumped about 2 feet. And he goes, oh, maybe that is affecting me a little bit. And I thought, gee, the burns on your face, the fact that you can't sleep, the fact that all this other stuff's going on, you don't think that it's affecting you, but the shower makes a boom, and now you realize that maybe something's going on. So I think it's just that you see so much, you have such a tough exterior that it's hard to kind of crack into that. But once you realize that that you have a safe place to do that, once you've really connected with your spouse to do that, you realize you don't have to carry that burden completely by yourself.
Is it that, or is it that, and I guess I'm speaking as a guy here, my concern being, if I open up that door, will I be able to close it? And that if I can't close it, it means I won't function. And if I don't function, I don't support my family. And if I don't support my family, will my wife really love me? I mean, It's not reality. It's clearly this obsessive thinking that happens.
Absolutely.
It seems like a lot of that
and I think that's
is about, I don't want to go there, because if I do, and I hear this more with other kinds of mood disorders, more, if I allow myself to get depressed or feel this or feel the, some of the past issues, I won't be able to move on. And I think it's got to be even worse for someone that's seen this horror.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where you look at kind of changing that department culture and really educating people in the beginning of their careers, where these are some things that you're going to see. This is how, these are some healthy ways of dealing with them, because unfortunately our fire families, the divorce rate is about 70%. The public, as far as the police, they're about 65% was the last national average.
Really? It's higher for firemen?
It's higher for firemen.
Why?
I really think it's just because there's all the overnight shifts. I think
the infidelity issues?
I think there's just, issues with infidelity, which goes on both sides of police and fire. But I think that there's just the stress of being that single parent that's in that relationship, having the spouse gone, but then you have all the other things that come along with being a first responder. You've got your sleep deprivation, your stress, you've got your secondary trauma issues. There's so many layers to that, but those are pretty high statistics for marriage.
That's incredible.
And so learning how to have a safe place to open up that emotion and learn how to get it out, and then learn how to contain it, like you're saying, to realize that it is okay for me to share this. And I know a lot of departments are working really hard right now to make sure that folks have a place to process that, and also to be able to contain it in a way that they don't feel like they're not being manly or they can't handle the job. I know they're really working hard to change that culture. I know they're working hard in the military to change that culture right now of it's okay to go to your superior and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this. How can I seek help?
And not see that as weakness.
And not see that as weakness, absolutely.
And not only for your superior, but not your buddy who's supposed to count on you, and that you're supposed to, watch his back and he's watching your back. How do you, within the culture that says it's not okay to talk about this stuff, make it okay so your buddy doesn't see you as weak?
Well, you kind of touch on a very key point, which is that kind of camaraderie and that mentality of the responsibility for the other. I know when my husband was burned, the Mayday calls are actually pretty graphic, but he was asking.
What is Mayday calls?
That means there's trouble. That means Mayday things are going really wrong.
Oh, that's what Mayday means?
Mayday means it's going really wrong.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay.
Anybody who's a first responder listening will know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, I'm sure they do, but a lot of my listeners
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So that call, literally all my husband was saying is where is so-and-so? Where is so-and-so? He was asking where everybody else was, not even realizing that he had been burned, what was going on. And that's really what a lot of these folks say is I'm more worried about the other person. And I can only imagine what's going on right now with the survivor's guilt from the Yarnell fire.
Ask you about that.
Because those folks that are there, it's a catch-22. It's I don't wish I would have died, but now I have to live with the hurt of knowing that I was the one who survived, and why me? And how do I support those families that now have lost somebody? And could I have made a different decision? There's so many questions that go into Survivor.
And why wasn't I one of the ones that was asked to go?
Exactly.
The whole survivor guilt is a fascinating kind of
because those are their brothers and sisters. It is the family culture. I can't even explain it to you completely, but in our situation, there was somebody that was coming over to mow the lawn, and we had dinners delivered, and we made sure that did we need help cleaning the house, and luckily my husband was, of anybody, was actually burned the least. But to see the community come together and to see that brother and sisterhood come together within the field of first responders, it's absolutely amazing. But what comes with that is a lot of guilt, unfortunately, and a lot of how do we talk about this? How do we have the conversation? Can I bring up this person's name? Do we remember memories of when we were all on that camping trip 2 years ago? It's really a challenge to be the person that still has survived and moving on. And then for the challenge of somebody who has lost their significant other also, because those memories are obviously forever changed.
And the other piece, and I'm thinking about, I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes, and it was more from a military standpoint, where they talked about some of the PTSD that some of these guys, and they were interviewing the commander, I think it was, who was talking about, now years later, it was Afghanistan, and that they were interviewing this guy who was asked about his buddy who was blown up, basically. And I can't remember the name of the interviewer, was asking him a little bit about what happened. And he refused to answer the question. And the reason he refused was because he said the guy's family doesn't know everything. And he doesn't want to be the one to basically have them now live with those memories.
Absolutely.
That he lives with. And as he was talking about it, he became very tearful and was starting to cry. And I was thinking about sort of the whole flashback piece for him. As he lies there alive, can he allow himself to enjoy his life? And the question that was asked was, would you trade places with him? And he said, in a heartbeat. He'd rather be the one that died. And I think in a lot of ways, it's almost like it's easier.
Sometimes it does. It feels
all those,
easier.
Not only the memories, but the sounds and all the things that come with that. And then bringing that home and now trying to make love to your wife and to be close and vulnerable and just allow yourself to feel the joy of a sexual experience or the joy of seeing your kids in a play. You don't want to allow yourself to do that.
Right. There's that. That's where that survivor kind of guilt comes in. Absolutely.
How do you work with those couples to allow to say, your wife needs you right now?
Well, the key point in that is really learning to honor the person who is gone by living the best life that you can. So it's really kind of switching that around from the guilt that comes into play to really how can you honor their life? How can you maybe have experiences that, if you lost a partner, for example, as a police officer, and your partner always wanted to go skydiving. I know somebody who then decided to go skydiving, never wanted to skydive. For him.
That's great.
And he said, this is what I want to do is I want to honor them by doing these things that they're no longer able to do. And it took a while to get there. But it's that place where, unfortunately, we're not changing the fact of what happened. The incident happened. And so you have to kind of process through between the emotion and the reality of what's occurred. And quite frankly, Stuart, the reality is that we have such sarcastic senses of humor, the things that we find funny.
The first responders you're talking about?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the things that we talk about and joke about, because it's also somewhat of a defense mechanism, but it kind of gets you through because you know that you can make this joke or you can kind of be sarcastic about something, and only another first responder is going to, one, find the humor in it, and two, maybe even get it. So
and
you kind of find a way.
Be willing to admit that you make the jokes.
Right. So the incident with the guy skydiving, I mean, he was really joking with his spouse ahead of time. He's like, well, wouldn't this be ironic if I died honoring him, in this process? Skydiving. That would be funny. And his wife's like, I don't think that's very funny, but she's laughing with him because she knows that's his way of kind of processing through some of that grief and yet still honoring his partner.
Do you know what I'm thinking? As you're telling me that story, it's very different, but I worked overnights for a while at Desert Samaritan Hospital, which is one of the hospitals in the Phoenix area. And it was the emergency room. I was a crisis counselor in the emergency room, and I'd get the psychotic clients and all of those. And, I also dealt with all the traumas that came in the families. And this was heavy, heavy, heavy stuff. And I remember one of the things that we did almost as a routine in the middle of a trauma was shooting rubber bands at each other. And you would say, oh, my God, this is serious stuff. But you need that relief. You need to find a way to make it just normal. And that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
And that's wonderful. We're almost out of time, and I guess I'm wondering, with your experience with working with these families, what do you think is the one thing that surprised you the most about this work with them?
That surprised me the most? Oh, wow.
I guess what I'm thinking, as you've done this for a while now and what you've learned about yourself and you learn about the work, what are some of the things that really have been the most meaningful? Maybe that's a better question.
What? I think when you asked me the question originally, the first thing I thought of is what never ceases to surprise me, actually, is the resiliency. And that's the one thing. I noticed it in the children of first responders. I noticed it in the spouses. I noticed it in the first responders themselves, because these are really some tough individuals. They really, they put out 100% for others, for strangers. And yet they really they're fighters, they're just resilient people. And to see they say they work hard to play hard, to really see them go from, at least in my practice, to see, couples coming in and really struggling, like you say, on that intimacy piece or that connection piece or the communication, to be able to leave that and thrive and live life again, connected and happy with that person by your side. I mean, our first responders, we retire early. So I always say, I want you to look across the table at your spouse in retirement and know who they are and enjoy their company. That's like a big goal, when they come in. Just the resiliency to see that, that they're fighters and that they have the ability to work through these issues with the same strength that they take into work, they can take into really working on themselves, that it's not a weakness to really work through those issues when they occur, because nobody expects an incident like the Yarnell fire to happen. I mean, that was just, I recall when it occurred, when we heard it in California and my husband mentioned it to me, we were both, had tears in our eyes. I mean, those are not just 19 families that are affected. That is hundreds of families and a community that is forever scarred by that incident. And the resiliency to bounce back and be stronger after an incident like that, which people think is so hard to hear in the beginning, but really to work through that and be stronger at the end, the resiliency to me is just amazing.
And I think the thing that I've been thinking about, being that it's going to be the 2-year anniversary, is, and I don't know if it also plays itself out with firemen, but I know with grief, just grief in general, generally the first few months, there's lots and lots and lots of support, and people come and they do, whether it's a religious ceremony or a civil ceremony, there's a whole lot of people there.
Absolutely.
And then after a period of time, people drift away and they're forgotten, basically, as if it's over. And now that it's almost 2 years, my concern is that those families really don't have the support that they really need. And sometimes this is the harder time, not the beginning.
It is absolutely, you really make a very good point. It is absolutely a harder time as time goes on. And that's where I say, it's a matter of feeling comfortable mentioning, somebody's name and reminding and talking about stories and talking about memories and really keeping that memory alive. I could, just with, a major incident in our country with 9/11, I mean, you see there's a reason why those stickers are still around where it still says never forget. I mean, my husband has his radio strap and it has 343 on it because that was the number of lives lost in 9/11. I mean, he wears that every day. So this community...
And he's probably not the only one.
No, he's not. No, he's not. But this community, I mean, that's really what, I want your listeners to understand is there is always a resource available to you and that understands what you're going through. It is just usually a phone call away. And that is really a matter of wherever you're comfortable. If you're comfortable in therapy, great. If you're comfortable, doing some type of a employee assistance program or going to a meditation retreat, I don't care what it is. I just want to see you healthy and better. But, it is a feeling of kind of once the calm is gone, I really feel like that's when the big storm hits because the silence screams the truth.
So if someone either here in this community or clearly this is going to be something that your community is going to hear about too, our podcast today. If someone wants to get hold of you or wants to ask any questions about any of this, that is struggling with some of this, what's the best way for them to get hold of you? The
best way for them to get a hold of me is actually through my website, which is KamiStorck-MFT.com. So it's KamiStorck mft.com.
And one of the things I'm going to do is I always, with all my podcasts, have show notes, and then I'm going to put a link on that to your website so people, if they want to get hold of you, can do that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody that needs anything to reach out, I can connect you within your own community or within your own department and kind of help you navigate those resources. But there are a lot of resources that are out there for you and you're not alone. And it is a brother and sisterhood, across the nation. So definitely.
I just want to thank you again and just let all my listeners know that Cami is something special and that she has such a great heart. So I really want anyone in her community especially to really reach out to her if you need to. And even in my community, if you're looking for support or a resource and you can't find it, someone who specializes, because this is clearly not a regular, you don't want to go to just any counselor for this. This is something that's highly specialized, and I think that's why I do emotionally focused therapy with that population. This population really takes someone special. So reach out to Cammie if you need to. I think you won't be sorry. Anyway, I want to thank you again and just wish you all a good night. And my next podcast, which is this is probably because of the conference and sort of interrupting my series on infidelity a bit, but the next podcast we're going to do next week is going to be on online infidelity and how to cope with those things. So I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with your host, Stuart Fensterheim. You're one step closer to reigniting that fiery passion with your partner. For more information and your 30-minute free phone consultation with Stuart, visit www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. We'll see you next time.